Hi, my name's Diamond. And last night, at my own family dinner, my sister looked across the table and said, "Too bad your baby looks nothing like your husband." Everyone laughed, even him. My husband. They thought I'd break, that I'd shrink, like I always do. But instead, I smiled and slid an envelope across the table. That's when the laughter stopped. You see, families like mine don't fight with fists, they fight with silence, secrets, and signatures. And in that moment, they realized I had all three. Now tell me, what would you do if the people who shared your blood tried to erase your name? I slid into my chair at the head of the dining table. Rosie nestled in my arms, her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of my blouse. She breathed softly against me, her warmth grounding me as the chandelier's golden light spilled across the polished mahogany surface. The table had been set immaculately, fine china, shining silverware, crystal glasses arranged just so, a picture of family unity. But beneath the polish, something colder pulsed. This wasn't just dinner. This was my re-entry. The first time I had set foot in this house since Rosie was born 6 months ago. No balloons, no welcome home banner. Just a dinner invite sent through my aunt, passed along like a message no one wanted to deliver directly. That suited me just fine. I didn't want the fuss, not from them. I adjusted Rosie's blanket as I sat. She made a soft coo, oblivious to the tension threading the air. My eyes swept the room briefly. To my left, Seraphine sat straight-backed in her navy sheath dress, lips painted crimson, smile tight and practiced, the same smile that once greeted cameras outside charity galas. Next to her, Damien, my husband, leaned in, murmuring something low about the appetizers, as if his voice could buffer the silence around us. Across from me, my father sat at the far end, his once dark beard now streaked with gray. He hadn't risen when I entered. His nod had been curt, his eyes unreadable. Beside him, my cousins whispered to each other in low tones. The clink of cutlery and distant laughter filtered in from the kitchen, but at the table, no one seemed to know where to look. The baby in my arms, my return, both unspoken landmines no one dared address. I smiled faintly. Rosie's a little sleepy. Long car ride. No one responded. The meal began in awkward courses. Appetizers were nibbled at, not discussed. Small talk hovered and dissolved. I kept my tone polite, my posture straight. I knew what this was, a performance, a power play disguised as dinner. By the time dessert arrived, a stunning fruit tart with golden custard and mint leaves arranged like a crown, Rosie had stirred awake, eyes blinking slowly as I offered her a soft bite of mashed banana. She didn't care for tarts or tension. Just me. I lived for that kind of simplicity now. That's when Seraphine cleared her throat. Everyone turned. She leaned slightly forward, her manicured nails resting gently on the edge of her plate, her tone sweet like syrup hiding poison. Her gaze fixed on Rosie. "Too bad your baby looks nothing like your husband." The sentence sliced clean through the air. Forks froze. Glasses trembled midair. Even the chandelier light seemed to dim under the weight of her words. I blinked once. Then again. The world stopped breathing. My mother, had she been alive, would have scolded such vulgarity. But Seraphine had always played by her own rules, especially when she knew the audience would let her get away with it. I felt Rosie shift against my chest. My lips parted, but the words caught in my throat. Then Damien laughed. It wasn't the loud, belly-deep laugh I used to fall in love with. It was small, uncomfortable. A betrayal cloaked in nervousness. "Maybe she has a secret," he said, eyes flicking to me for just a second, and then away, cowardly. A slow burn crawled up my neck. The man who once held my hand in delivery rooms, who kissed my forehead when I doubted my strength, now threw his lot in with the wolves. My silence was louder than anything I could have said. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I straightened. My spine aligned like a blade. I looked around the table, at the eyes avoiding mine, at the mouths pressed into guilty lines. I raised my glass, slow and steady. My fingers didn't tremble. "To family," I said, each word like a gavel, and their sharp tongues. The silence cracked. A few throats cleared. My father shifted slightly in his seat. One cousin's mouth twitched, as if unsure whether to laugh or wince. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees. Rosie gurgled softly, unaware she'd just been the pawn in a public ambush. Seraphine met my gaze, eyes like cold crystal. She smiled. The kind of smile that says game on. But she didn't know I had come prepared for this war. I had spent nights rehearsing, not in front of mirrors, but in the quiet moments between feedings and tears. In the dark, while holding my daughter and wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. I had imagined this moment, returning not to grovel, but to endure, to stand. They thought motherhood had weakened me. What they didn't understand was, Rosie didn't break me. She remade me. I stood now not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who had already survived abandonment in the same room where dessert was now being served. The dinner resumed, awkwardly. Someone asked about the weather. Another complimented the tart. But the wound had been made, and everyone saw the first drop of blood. As the plates cleared and Damien tried to brush his hand across my shoulder, I turned slightly, enough to make the rejection subtle but final. He didn't try again. When I finally rose, Rosie still nestled against me. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't need to. The silence parted as I walked, like a curtain drawn for an exit. The first cut had been made, and it was public. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them prepare for the second act. After the dinner, I didn't sleep right away. The silence that followed Seraphine's smirk clung to the walls like perfume gone stale. I could still hear the clinking of silverware, the polite coughs, the awkward shuffle of napkins. When I finally crawled into bed, Rosie stirred beside me in her travel crib, her small hand stretching toward me as if to remind me that some loves were still pure. I kissed her palm and whispered, "You're the only thing that's mine for real." Morning sunlight crept through the shutters, painting long lines across the hardwood floor. Outside, the garden buzzed with movement. Someone had set up a white tent and rows of chairs facing the old magnolia tree. Voices drifted in through the open window, Seraphine's, clear and commanding, directing staff. Apparently, she had planned a baby blessing for Rosie, a post-reunion family event, her idea of healing. My invitation came last, slipped under the door sometime after dawn. I almost laughed at the timing. I fed Rosie slowly, burping her against my shoulder, then changed into a simple cream dress. The mirror caught my reflection, puffy eyes, faint lines at the corners, but steady. I told myself I could handle one more morning of pretending. By the time I stepped into the backyard, the ceremony was already underway. The air smelled of roses and fresh-cut grass. Family members filled the chairs, a perfect circle of unity, except for the empty space where one seat should have been. There were name cards, grandmother, matriarch, beloved aunt, even family friend. But nothing for me. Not a single seat marked mother. I stood behind the group, holding Rosie on my hip. My arms ached, but I didn't put her down. Seraphine was reading from a little note titled Celebrating New Life, her voice syrupy and loud enough to reach the neighbors. She didn't glance my way once. After a few minutes, I spotted a folded chair leaning against the fence. Without saying a word, I carried it over and placed it at the far edge of the circle. No one moved to help. The metal scraped the stone patio, the sound slicing through the fake serenity. Seraphine continued her speech about family legacy and shared love. I watched her lips move, her pearls catching the light, her perfect posture rehearsed to death. Rosie tugged at my necklace, cooing, and I smiled down at her. She didn't know this was supposed to be her moment, not mine. When the reading ended, everyone clapped politely. Seraphine turned at last, her smile tight. "Diamond, so glad you made it," she said. "We started early. You know how babies can get fussy with time." Her tone made it sound like she'd done me a favor. I nodded. "Yeah, I've heard they need their mothers close. Lucky thing she's got one." A few relatives coughed into their hands. Seraphine blinked slowly, lips pressed thin. She gestured toward the gifts arranged on a nearby table. "Let's move on to presents, shall we?" Boxes wrapped in silver paper glimmered in the sunlight. I sat quietly, adjusting Rosie's bonnet. Awfully, my father's old friend, approached with a warm smile and handed me a square package. "I made something special," she whispered. "A memory album for you." Her sincerity eased the tightness in my chest. I thanked her softly and placed it on my lap. When I unwrapped the paper, the air shifted. Inside was a photo album bound in ivory leather, embossed with roses. Beautiful, but the tag taped to the front read, "With love, from Seraphine." I blinked. For a moment I thought maybe Awfully had gotten confused, maybe they'd mixed gifts. But when I looked up, Awfully's expression froze. She mouthed, "That's not my tag." A chill slid down my back. Someone had replaced it. Not carelessly, deliberately. Seraphine caught my eye across the lawn, her expression unreadable. She raised her glass of lemonade and toasted in my direction, a smug little tilt of the wrist. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I smiled back because smiling had become my armor. As people chatted and passed plates of finger sandwiches, I excused myself, walking slowly toward the house. The hallway mirror caught me again, same reflection as last night, but with sharper edges. Rosie slept now, her cheek pressed to my shoulder, heavy and peaceful. I studied my face, not the way it looked, but what it had endured. How many times do I have to disappear before I stop existing to them? I murmured. My voice sounded strange in the quiet. There was a time I believed family wounds healed with time and patience. But time, in this house, didn't heal. It rewrote. I wandered into the sitting room and sat on the couch. The photo album still rested in my lap. Curiosity burned stronger than anger. I opened it. The first page held a photo of Rosie, taken right after birth, her tiny fingers curled around Damien's thumb. Underneath, someone had written in looping cursive, "First steps, witnessed by Aunt Seraphine." My throat tightened. She wasn't even there, I whispered. That photo was taken in our living room, months before Seraphine even visited. I flipped the next page, another caption, "Rocked to sleep by her favorite aunt." Lies stacked on paper, carefully printed, neatly glued. Each image was real. Each caption erased me. I felt something inside me shift. Not a scream, not a tear, but a line being drawn. They wanted a story where I was a ghost. But ghosts remember everything. In the hallway, laughter drifted in from the garden, the easy, surface kind. The kind that hides rot beneath politeness. I closed the album slowly and pressed my palm to the cover. "You can have the spotlight, Seraphine," I whispered. "But you don't get my child story." When I stood, the sunlight had shifted across the room, a slant of gold catching on the frame of Rosie's photo by the fireplace. I tucked the album into my diaper bag, kissed her forehead, and walked back outside. Seraphine was taking more pictures with the family, everyone arranged perfectly beneath the magnolia tree. She noticed me and waved, smiling like we were sisters again. "Come join us," she called. "Let's get one with the whole family." I walked closer, stopping just short of the camera. "You sure there's a spot for me this time?" The photographer looked confused. Seraphine's smile twitched, but she kept her tone breezy. "Of course, darling. Always room for you." I nodded. "Right." When the shutter clicked, I smiled. Not for her, not for the picture, but because I knew exactly what this photograph would mean someday. Proof that I was there. Proof they couldn't crop out. Later, after everyone drifted back inside for coffee, I stayed under the tree a little longer, listening to the wind rustle the leaves. Rosie stirred, blinking up at me. I traced a finger along her cheek. "One day, you'll know the truth. And you'll never have to doubt where you come from." In the distance, Seraphine's laughter rang out again, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses. It didn't matter. The more they tried to erase me, the more visible I became to myself. She wasn't even there, and yet, she claimed every moment like it was hers. After the ceremony ended, the house slowly swallowed the noise of laughter and clinking cups. I lingered near the window for a while, watching the sunlight turn amber on the grass. Rosie had fallen asleep against my chest, her breath warm through the cotton of my dress. I didn't want to go back inside, but staying out there, where Seraphine's voice carried like perfume through the air, felt worse. So I walked back into the house, through the back door that creaked faintly the way it used to when I was a kid sneaking in past curfew. The sound comforted me, strangely. It was something real in a house that had become a stage set. The hallway upstairs had always been a kind of museum. Each frame on the wall told a story. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, weddings. Faces smiling in frozen joy. When I was younger, I used to count how many times my own smile appeared. Now, as I pushed Rosie's stroller along the carpet, I realized those smiles had faded, not by time, but by choice. Halfway down the corridor, I stopped. The picture from my wedding hung crooked. Damien stood tall in his tuxedo, glass in hand. Seraphine beside him, radiant in her satin dress. My father, teary-eyed. And me, slightly blurred, like fog had found me and refused to leave. I blinked. It wasn't just blur. It was deliberate. The light from the window glared against the glass, but when I tilted the frame forward, I saw the faint outline of scissors along the edge. My image, softened, retouched, almost faded out of focus, while theirs looked pristine. The photographer's watermark was gone, replaced with a cheap reprint label. Someone had tampered with it. I whispered to myself, why would anyone go this far? Rosie shifted, letting out a tiny sigh. I pressed the stroller's brake and moved closer to the next frame. It was taken at the hospital, me holding Rosie, her head wrapped in that little striped newborn blanket. But my face had been cut clean out and replaced with another photo, Seraphine, wearing similar colors, pasted perfectly where my head should have been. I froze. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't clumsy or rushed. It was deliberate, calculated. My hand trembled as I touched the glass. The seam was barely visible, but I could feel it, a thin ridge where paper met paper. My knees felt weak. For a long moment, I just stood there, the sound of the air conditioner whispering above. The anger came quietly, like a slow tide. No shouting, no tears. Just the cold realization that someone wanted me erased from my own life. I lifted the frame off the wall, holding it close. The weight felt heavier than it should. As I turned toward the stairs, I caught sight of another frame. Our family Christmas portrait from 2 years ago. The composition was perfect. The tree, the garland, the dog at our feet. Seraphine's hand rested lightly on Damien's shoulder, and my own hand, once there, was cropped clean out of the picture. The edges were neat, the cut intentional. By the time I reached the nursery, my chest felt tight. The soft pastel walls and faint scent of baby lotion greeted me. I laid Rosie gently in her crib, adjusting her blanket. Then I noticed the quilt draped across the rocking chair, a patchwork of lilac and cream squares, each piece stitched by hand. I recognized it instantly. I'd made it. During those sleepless nights of pregnancy, I had sewn it square by square, humming softly to distract myself from contractions. I had stitched my initials, DR, on the underside of one corner, small, discreet, but there. Now a paper tag dangled from the top, gifted with love by Aunt Seraphine. For a second, my breath caught in my throat. The handwriting was elegant, practiced, a fake kindness in every loop of the pen. I tore it off carefully, trying not to wake Rosie. Then I turned the quilt over, fingertips tracing the stitches until I found the familiar embroidery. My initials were still there. Proof that I existed. Proof that my love had shape. I sat down in the rocking chair, the quilt over my lap. The rhythmic creak of the chair steadied me. They're rewriting my story, I murmured, the words tasting like steel. But they'll find out soon enough. I'm writing my own chapter. The door creaked behind me. I turned to see Ophelie standing there, her face pale, eyes uncertain. She looked like she'd aged a year since morning. Diamond, she said softly, stepping into the room. I need to tell you something. I waited, silent. She hesitated, wringing her hands. That album yesterday, the one with the photos? I didn't give Seraphine permission to use my name. I never wrote that tag. And the pictures, those weren't mine. I exhaled slowly. So, she's not just claiming my baby's milestones. She's taking everything else too. Ophelie shook her head. I tried to confront her about it earlier, but she brushed me off. Said it was a mix-up.
She met my eyes.
But it's not a mix-up, is it? No, I said quietly. It's a rewrite. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. She's been collecting things, photos, gifts, even copies of letters. Says she's organizing the family archive. My stomach clenched. Archive. I repeated. The word had weight. An archive was permanent. I looked at Rosie sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling, unaware of the erasures being made in her name. If they want to edit me out, they'll have to work harder. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the camera app. Diamond, what are you doing? Ophelie asked. Something Seraphine doesn't expect. I began snapping photos one by one. The quilt, the fake tag, the altered portraits I had carried from the hall. Each click of the shutter was a quiet act of defiance. Let's see how they explain this, I said. Ophelie bit her lip. Be careful. You know how she gets when she feels cornered. I'm not cornering her, I replied, voice steady. I'm just documenting what's already there. The air between us hung heavy. Ophelie reached out, touching my arm gently. You deserve better than this, Diamond. I gave a faint smile. Maybe. But right now, I just need proof. She nodded and left quietly, closing the door behind her. The room dimmed as the sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the walls, soft and long. I rocked Rosie gently, phone still in my hand. For the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like prey. I felt awake. They could cut my face from every picture, cross my name off every tag, and still, my fingerprints would be everywhere. In the stitches, the smiles, the moments they couldn't fake. Outside, a storm cloud rolled over the horizon. The wind picked up, tapping the window pane. Rosie stirred again, murmuring softly in her sleep. I leaned forward, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Let them edit the pictures. I'll rewrite the story." I stood, slipping the phone into my pocket. I'd captured enough for one day. But tomorrow, I'd start gathering more. One photo at a time, one truth at a time. Let's see how they explain this. The rain began just as the sun tucked itself behind the line of pine trees outside, as if the sky had finally surrendered to the day's tension. It came quietly at first, a gentle tapping against the window panes, almost hesitant, like someone unsure if they were welcome. Inside, the house buzzed with warmth and noise, lights casting soft golden glows over the familiar faces and unfamiliar conversations. I had just laid Rosie down for what I hoped would be a peaceful nap, but the storm had other plans. She stirred quickly, her small body restless, eyes wide and searching in the dimness. I picked her up and carried her with me into the living room, where the family had gathered around the fireplace, talking and drinking like nothing had ever broken us. Seraphine sat poised in the corner, draped in a cashmere wrap, a glass of Chardonnay cradled delicately in one hand like it was part of her. Her laughter fluttered through the air, lilting and rehearsed, designed to pull attention like a hook through soft fabric. Damien leaned casually against the arm of the sofa near her, talking about his latest tech project, voice animated, full of that slick charisma that once drew me in like gravity. I sat on the edge of the couch, quiet, Rosie curled against me. I rubbed gentle circles on her back, feeling her heartbeat sync with mine. They talked about everything: politics, real estate, new schools for the cousins, but not me. Not one question. Not even a glance. My father beamed as he turned to Seraphine. "Tell them about the award, sweetheart. The Southern Women in Leadership, right?" Seraphine let out a modest little hum, like the memory had just now occurred to her.
"Oh, that?"
"It was a surprise," she said, eyes sparkling. "But, hard work eventually gets noticed." Damien chuckled, raising his glass. "And no one juggles business and family like you do." Family. The word landed like a knife between my ribs. I looked at Damien, hoping, foolishly, for some acknowledgement. A flicker. A sign. But his eyes never reached mine. Rosie stirred, her little fingers clutching at my necklace, grounding me again. "She's getting so big," Seraphine said suddenly, nodding at Rosie. "Almost doesn't even look like a baby anymore." "She takes after her mother," Damien replied, smiling. At Seraphine. For a beat, everything inside me froze. I wondered if he realized what he'd said. If that was a mistake or a message. Either way, the energy in the room changed. Quick, sharp, full of unspoken things. A few chuckles broke out. Someone shifted uncomfortably. My aunt gave me that tight-lipped pity smile I'd come to loathe, more damaging than any sneer. Before I could react, Rosie squirmed off my lap and toddled unsteadily across the rug. She stumbled, regained her balance, then lifted her arms toward Seraphine with a tiny, clear voice. "Mommy." The word sliced the room in half. Silence fell like a curtain. Everyone froze. Seraphine blinked, startled, then slipped on her signature smile as she leaned forward to scoop Rosie into her arms. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "I think someone's a little confused." My spine straightened. My breath caught. Damien burst out laughing, loud, forced, too eager. "Guess she knows who does all the spoiling around here." Then a voice, whoever it was, chimed in. "Maybe the baby knows something we don't." Laughter erupted again. Not warm, not light, but sharp, cruel, careless. I stared straight ahead, willing myself not to flinch. Rosie looked over at me, sensing the shift. Her brow furrowed in that way babies do when they're trying to understand what's wrong. I stood, slow and steady. "Come to me, baby." Seraphine hesitated, long enough to make a point, then handed Rosie over with a syrupy tone. "Of course. She's just tired." I gathered Rosie close, pressed a kiss to her head. "That must be it," I said, my voice cool. Confusion does run in the family. No one laughed. The tension snapped. Conversations limped back to life. The rain thickened outside, tapping harder now. Rosie tucked her head into my neck, her breathing shallow and uneven. I rocked her until sleep returned. Later, after the children were upstairs and the plates had been cleared, the adults circled around the kitchen island. Wine bottles had multiplied. Voices were louder, looser. Damien, basking in the afterglow of male attention and Seraphine's doting gaze, rummaged through a box Seraphine had organized earlier. From the pile, he pulled a small leather-bound book and held it up.
Oh wow.
Diamond's old pregnancy journal. My stomach dropped through the floor. He opened it casually, fingers flipping pages like they were public property. "Dear baby, I hope your father learns how to change diapers before you arrive," he read aloud. The room cracked with laughter. Seraphine gasped theatrically. "Oh my God, that's hilarious. It sounds like a stand-up bit." That journal had lived on my nightstand for months. I'd written in it by lamplight, when Rosie's kicks kept me awake. I wrote in it the night Damien forgot our anniversary. I wrote through my fears, through my hopes, believing they were safe. Damien kept reading. "I hope Daddy learns that holding a baby isn't the same as holding a phone." More laughter. I stared at him, my hands clenched at my sides. When the laughter finally faded, I spoke. "Thank you," I said flatly. I didn't realize my private journal had been turned into open mic night. The room tensed. Damien gave a sheepish grin. "It's just a joke, Diamond." "No," I said. "A joke is when everyone laughs, not when it's at someone else's cost." The silence that followed was like wet wool, thick, suffocating. Seraphine gave her signature soft laugh. "Don't be so sensitive. We're family. We don't mean harm." I locked eyes with her. "You don't have to mean it to do it." I stepped back, adjusting Rosie on my hip. "We're done for the night." No one stopped me. In the guest room, the air felt heavier than before. I sat briefly on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Then I rose. I packed Rosie's things, her blanket, her giraffe, her clothes. No rush. Only clarity. I descended the stairs like a ghost, the house silent behind me. Outside, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. I strapped Rosie in, sat behind the wheel. My phone lit up, photos I'd taken, erased names, switched tags, doctored posts. Each one, a piece of the truth they tried to bury. I scrolled through them slowly. I didn't delete a single one. I looked at the house one last time, its warm light glowing through the fog like a lie. "You turn my story into a sideshow," I whispered. "But I'm the one who writes the ending." I started the car. The gravel crunched beneath me. Rosie sighed in her sleep. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was steering it. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of southern Sunday that smelled like humidity and regret. I didn't sleep much. Rosie had stirred through the night, and each time I soothed her, I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible lines between what had happened and what still needed to come. By noon, the sky had cleared just enough for sunlight to pour through the blinds, bright and sharp. Sunday lunch was a family tradition, something my father insisted on, no matter how fractured the week had been. "Family keeps us grounded," he always said. I used to believe him. When I arrived, everyone was already there. The long dining table gleamed again, set with china that hadn't been touched since Christmas. The smell of roasted chicken, buttered rolls, and sweet tea filled the air. Rosie cooed in her car seat as I stepped into the doorway. Seraphine was in her usual spot beside Damien, head bent close as if whispering state secrets. My father sat at the end of the table, his tie slightly crooked, his presence still commanding even as the years softened his voice. He looked up at me, just for a moment, and said, "Diamond, be a dear and get the iced tea pitcher from the kitchen." The words landed like a soft slap. "Of course," I said. No one else moved. Even the youngest cousin, barely old enough to spell her name, was being served. I carried the empty pitcher to the kitchen, filled it slowly under the faucet, and stared at the reflection rippling in the metal sink. My own face looked strange there, warped by water and light. When I returned, the conversation hadn't paused. Damien was telling a story about his new client, Seraphine laughing on cue. My seat at the table, next to Damien, was taken. My cousin had slid in, chatting with him about real estate. I stood quietly, pitcher in hand. No one looked up. I set the tea on the table and stayed standing, pretending I was just waiting for someone else to need something. My father nodded absent-mindedly in approval, as if I'd done my duty. I caught Seraphine's glance, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. It wasn't about the tea. It was about control. Lunch continued, filled with polite noises and deliberate omissions. I spooned mashed potatoes for Rosie, who sat in her stroller beside me. She gurgled happily, unaware of the theater around her. I envied her innocence. As the plates were cleared and dessert was brought in, peach cobbler, golden and steaming, I decided it was time. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, white envelope. It looked harmless, almost dainty, sitting there on the polished wood. But I could feel the weight of it. I placed it gently between the dessert plates, right in front of Seraphine. The chatter dimmed. Forks paused midair. Since we're handing out roles and rewriting truths, I said, my tone calm but cutting, I thought I'd bring my own contribution to the family narrative. Seraphine blinked, her smile faltering. What's that supposed to mean? Damien frowned slightly, shifting in his chair. Diamond. I cut him off softly. You'll see. No one spoke. Even the ticking clock in the hallway seemed to hush itself. Seraphine reached for the envelope, fingers brushing its edge. I could tell she was trying to keep her composure, chin lifted, lips curved, but the tiny twitch near her I gave her away. What's in it? She asked. Proof, I said. She gave a small laugh, too bright, too brittle. Of what? Every lie comes with a receipt, I replied. Her hand froze midair. My father cleared his throat, the sound low and uncertain. Diamond, he said slowly. Maybe this isn't the time? Oh, I think it's exactly the time, I interrupted. I've watched my name disappear from photographs, my gifts relabeled, my journal turned into a family comedy routine. And now you want to talk about timing? Damien leaned forward, face pale. What are you talking about? I met his eyes. You know what I'm talking about. He opened his mouth, but Seraphine spoke first. This is absurd, she said, voice rising slightly. You're being paranoid. I smiled. Am I? I nodded toward the envelope. Open it or don't. Makes no difference to me. She didn't move. I could feel the tension crawling across the table, tightening like invisible string. My father's hand rested against his fork, knuckles whitening. The younger cousins looked around, eyes wide, unsure if this was entertainment or danger. When no one reached for the envelope, I leaned back slightly. Not ready yet? That's okay. We have 8 more meals this week. The silence deepened. I stood, brushing an invisible crumb from my dress. Rosie giggled suddenly, the sound bright and pure against the heavy air. I bent down, kissed her forehead and whispered, Good job, baby. Always smile when they expect you to cry. Then I turned back to the table. Enjoy your lunch, I said lightly. Don't let the cobbler get cold. And with that I walked away. Each step echoed down the hallway like a drumbeat, measured, deliberate, final. I could feel their eyes following me, feel the confusion and fear mixing behind me. In the kitchen, I paused. The sunlight streamed through the window, hitting the silverware stacked by the sink. For the first time, I realized how quiet my own heart had become. Not numb, not broken, just still. Through the doorway, I heard Seraphine's voice, low and tense. What do you think she put in it? Damien's reply came after a pause. Whatever it is, she means it. I smiled to myself. The sound of my father's voice followed, strained but uncertain. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a scare tactic. But he didn't believe it. None of them did. I stepped outside, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and late summer heat. Rosie babbled in her stroller, reaching for the sunlight that danced on her fingers. For the first time, I whispered, They're the ones who can't eat in peace. The sun dipped lower behind the marshes as the heat of the day began to fade. The house had grown still, the kind of quiet that isn't peace but pressure. I stood outside for a long while after the family lunch, watching the sky turn from gold to ash. Inside, I could hear faint voices, clinking glasses, the shuffle of chairs. They were pretending everything was normal, pretending that the envelope didn't sit on that table like a loaded gun. By the time I went back in, the lights were dimmed. The men had migrated to the den, where a muted baseball game flickered on TV. The women sat scattered in the living room, their conversations soft, guarded. The scent of lemon polish and old books filled the air, mixing with the faint smoke from my father's pipe. The envelope lay untouched on the coffee table, white and small, yet impossible to ignore. Every so often, Seraphine's eyes darted toward it before she looked away again, laughing too loudly at nothing. I took a seat on the far armchair, balancing Rosie in one arm, her small fingers tugging at my hair. She was half asleep, cheeks warm from the long day. The clock ticked softly in the corner, its rhythm syncing with the sound of my own heartbeat. Damien sat across the room, elbows on his knees, staring at the TV but not watching. He hadn't spoken to me since lunch. His silence was less about guilt and more about fear. Fear of what might happen when that envelope opened. "Coffee, anyone?" my father asked, breaking the tension. His voice was thin, almost tentative. No one answered. Seraphine shifted in her chair. "It's just paper," she said, almost to herself. I didn't respond. I let her words hang there, hollow and nervous. Finally, Damien reached forward, his fingers brushing the edge of the envelope. "Let's just open it," he said. Seraphine snapped. "You don't have to." He looked up, his tone sharper now. "We do. I need to know what's in there." The room held its breath as he tore the flap open. Inside was a neat stack of printed pages, clipped together. He glanced at the first one, and his face changed. His brows furrowed, his color draining. "What is this?" he muttered. "Read it," I said softly. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Application for certificate of baptism, child, Rosie Reynolds. Guardian signature, Seraphine Hale." A collective inhale filled the room. He flipped to the next page. It was an email printout from Seraphine to a notary service. I'd highlighted one line in yellow. "If we can register me as the godmother formally, it will make it easier to handle any future guardianship issues should Diamond become unavailable." My father set his drink down hard. "What is this, Seraphine?" She straightened, her face pale but her tone defiant. "It was a formality. It doesn't mean anything." Awfully, who had been silent all evening, leaned forward. "A formality? You try to take her child's paperwork without her consent." Seraphine glared at her. "Don't be dramatic. It was precautionary." I stood slowly. "You call it precaution. I call it premeditated theft of identity." Damien kept reading. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the last page, a notarized affidavit, dated 6 weeks after Rosie's birth. My name had been replaced by a blank space, with Seraphine's listed as designated guardian. And then came the voice memo. I had sent him the audio file through a link, and when he pressed play, Seraphine's voice filled the room. Clear, cold, unmistakable.
"She'll fade," she said.
"Diamond always does. We'll just keep the baby close, and she'll drift off. It's better for everyone." The sound of her voice echoed like a ghost through the walls. My father froze. Awfully covered her mouth. Damien stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, every muscle in his body rigid. Seraphine shot to her feet. That was taken out of context. I tilted my head. Really? Because it sounds perfectly in context to me. She turned to my father, desperate. "Dad, you know I would never." He raised his hand sharply, silencing her. For the first time in years, I saw something like disappointment in his eyes. "Sit down, Seraphine." Her lips parted, but no words came. She sank back into her chair, trembling slightly. I looked at her. This woman who had spent years painting me invisible, who smiled while erasing me one detail at a time, and I felt no hatred, just a tired kind of relief. "You've been trying to erase me since before Rosie was born," I said quietly. "Now your prints are all over the crime scene." Seraphine shook her head, whispering, "You're twisting everything." "No," I said. "You did that yourself." Damien still held the papers, staring down as though they might dissolve. "Why?" he asked her finally, voice low, broken. "Why would you do something like this?" She didn't answer. The silence stretched. My father rose slowly from his chair, his hand shaking as he set down his glass of scotch. "This family has endured lies before," he said softly. "But this," his voice cracked slightly, "this crosses into something darker." No one moved. Even Rosie had gone still in my arms, her breathing steady and soft against my chest. I took the envelope back, slipping the documents neatly inside. "This is just a copy," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "The originals are with my lawyer." Seraphine's eyes widened. You wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" I interrupted. "Protect my daughter? Tell the truth." I looked around the room. No one met my gaze. Not my father. Not Damien. Not anyone. So I smiled. A quiet, deliberate smile. "Then we're done here." I turned and began to walk toward the stairs. My shoes made soft, steady sounds against the hardwood floor. Behind me, I heard Damien whisper something to my father, but I didn't turn around. As I reached the bottom step, Awfully called softly, "Diamond." I paused. Her eyes glistened. "You did the right thing." I nodded once. "It's about time someone did." I went upstairs, each step lighter than the last. Rosie stirred against me, her tiny fingers clutching the fabric of my blouse. When we reached the landing, I looked down at her and whispered, "Now they know." The house below buzzed faintly, voices overlapping, frantic, broken, but it no longer mattered. The power had shifted, and they felt it. For the first time, their silence was not control, it was consequence. I laid Rosie gently in her crib, brushed her hair from her forehead, and stood there for a long moment, listening to the thunder rolling far in the distance. "That's only part one," I said softly. "We're just getting started." That night, I barely slept. My thoughts chased each other in frantic loops, half-formed plans, lingering fragments of conversations, doubts that gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The weight of what I had revealed pressed heavy on my chest, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Every creak in the walls, every soft footstep in the hallway became a question I couldn't answer. Were they regrouping? Retaliating? Regretting? Voices carried through the vents. Not clearly, just muffled murmurs, broken syllables that danced with suspicion. Sometimes they sounded like arguments. Sometimes like prayers. I couldn't tell. Rosie lay curled beside me, her breath slow and even, undisturbed by the tension soaking into the room. I brushed my fingers across her soft cheek, pausing at her long lashes. "We're moving now," I whispered. By dawn, the house had gone eerily still. Curtains were drawn tight, as though the walls themselves wished to stay blind to the light. The air carried a damp scent of earth and dew, laced with the faint, lingering perfume of magnolia blossoms that clung stubbornly to the trees outside. It reminded me that beauty could exist, even in poisoned soil. I dressed quietly in the half-light, pulling on jeans and a fitted black coat. Rosie stirred once in her crib as I changed her into a warm onesie and wrapped her in a soft blanket. She blinked but didn't fuss, almost like she knew. I walked past the family portraits in the hallway. At the end hung the wedding photo, the one where they had blurred my face, as if I were a smudge on their perfect canvas. I paused, stared at it long enough for bitterness to rise in my throat. Soon, they'll see more than a smear, I thought. They'll see the whole damn picture. I slipped out the side door, careful not to disturb the stillness. The grass crunched slightly underfoot, still wet with morning moisture. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound splitting the quiet like a crack in glass. Garden lamps still glowed faintly, their light a dull halo in the mist. I walked the familiar path toward the guest house, Seraphine's private office, the sanctum where secrets were spun into strategy. I hesitated outside the window, heart thrumming in my ears. Inside, a lamp bathed the room in golden light. Through the sheer curtains, I could make out the elegant arc of Seraphine's spine as she poured tea into delicate china cups. Her every movement was graceful, practiced, performed. Damien paced behind her, hands in his pockets, his energy tense. His voice was low but carried enough for fragments to reach me. "She's smarter than I thought," Seraphine said, her voice clipped, controlled. But I could hear the tremble beneath. "But it's not over. We can still control the narrative." Damien stopped pacing and leaned on the edge of her desk. "We need to get ahead of this. People are already asking questions. That envelope, it made too many waves." "We leaked something first," she said, setting the teapot down. "A vague story. Something about emotional instability. New mother. Stress. A concerned family angle." He nodded slowly. "We discredit her without touching her directly. Let them draw the conclusions." Seraphine's expression hardened. I found the old messages, screenshots from her private chats. Innocent words, twisted the right way, looked damning. And Awfully's draft. She never meant to send it, but it's just enough to raise doubts. Damien exhaled through his nose. "We leak it tomorrow night. That way, no one's sure what's true anymore." Seraphine raised her teacup, eyes glinting over the rim. "They'll believe anything if they think someone else is telling the story." I'd heard enough. I stepped into the doorway, my phone raised, voice recorder glowing red. My voice came steady and sharp. "I thought you two only lied to my face. Didn't know you whispered it behind my back, too." Both heads whipped toward me. Seraphine's cup dropped onto its saucer with a loud clatter. Damien stiffened, color draining from his face. "You're planning a smear campaign?" I asked, stepping fully into the room. "As family?" Damien's mouth opened, closed. Seraphine stood slowly, her face cycling through emotions so fast I couldn't name them all. Hurt, fear, rage, maybe even guilt. But none of them changed the facts. I took a breath. You know, when someone controls the narrative, they control the truth. Damien looked at Seraphine. Diamond. No. I cut him off, my voice low and firm. I walked away from your lies once. But if you so much as breathe them near my daughter's name, I will drag the truth into court. And not just yours. Everyone's. Silence fell. Heavy. Cold. I turned to him. You can sit at this table and plot. But you'll never sit at hers again. His jaw clenched. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Shame? Remorse? Or just panic? I didn't care. I turned my back on them, each step deliberate. Behind me, the door clicked shut. As it did, I heard Seraphine's voice crack under her breath. We have to hit first. She's too calm, she's already won half the battle. Outside, the morning was colder than before. The sky had brightened to a pale silver, clouds soft and bruised at the edges. Rosie stirred in my arms. Her eyes, wide and clear, looked up at me with a quiet trust only a child could give. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, kissed her forehead. We're not just walking away anymore, I whispered. We're walking forward. Behind us, the old gates groaned closed, soft as a confession. And this time, I didn't look back. The morning arrived wrapped in pale gold, quiet and slow, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Dew clung to the petals of the garden roses, and a cool breeze stirred the jasmine vines along the wall. I stepped onto the patio with Rosie in my arms, her weight familiar, grounding. Her tiny fingers clutched mine, as though even she sensed the tension simmering beneath the surface of what was supposed to be a family gathering. The table had been dressed like a dream, white linen cloth, crystal glasses catching the light like shards of ice, polished silver cutlery neatly aligned beside porcelain plates. It would have been beautiful, if not for the undercurrent of performance that ran through it all. Conversations floated on the air like leaves skimming water, too light, too practiced. No one was truly present. Seraphine stood at the head of the table like a queen in a court she believed she ruled. Her posture was impeccable, her tailored blazer pristine, and yet her eyes flicked across the table too fast. She was rehearsed.
Composed.
A woman at the peak of her manipulation. I knew that look all too well. She tapped her glass with a silver fork. The crystalline sound silenced the room. I'd like to say something, she began, her voice steady, controlled. Diamond, I think somewhere along the way, we lost each other. There have been misunderstandings, and for that, I want to apologize. Truly. I hope we can mend what's broken. A light flutter of applause followed, polite and cold. A few women pressed napkins to their eyes as though moved, but I saw through the act. I saw their glances, fleeting and uncertain. This wasn't remorse, it was reputation management. Damien, seated beside her, gave her hand a tight squeeze, his jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but his silence was loud enough. My father smiled as if proud of the gesture, but the corners of his lips twitched, betraying discomfort. I said nothing. I didn't rise. I didn't offer forgiveness. I held Rosie closer, her breath soft against my neck, and remained seated, anchored in the storm. As dessert was announced, the mood lifted. Chatter resumed. Laughter returned, though it sounded strained. I murmured an excuse and slipped away through the side path lined with boxwood hedges. The hush of leaves welcomed me like an old friend. This path had once been my escape route as a child. It still was. Inside the house, I moved quickly and quietly through the halls, past portraits of ancestors who'd likely turn in their graves if they knew the things whispered in this family. I reached Seraphine's office, her sanctuary of control, and opened the door without knocking. There, beside her mahogany desk, was a wastebasket. Inside it, a ball of cream-colored paper. I pulled it out, unfolded it carefully. The apology speech. Her handwriting, elegant but firm, filled the page. I read every line, even as my stomach knotted tighter. And then, at the bottom, scrawled in a different ink, hasty, say whatever shuts her up. She doesn't have the guts to go public. The air left my lungs in one short breath. There it was, the truth. Not just hidden, but discarded. Not remorse, but manipulation. A weapon dressed in soft words and careful tone. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Proof. Not for them.
For me.
When I returned, the guests were enjoying peach tart adorned with mint leaves and sugared petals. Seraphine was laughing at something an uncle had said, her performance uninterrupted. I moved through the crowd unnoticed, taking my seat once more, watching, waiting. Later, as the plates were cleared and wine refilled, I rose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Wait, I said softly. Yet the words sliced through the noise like a blade. All eyes turned. Damien paused mid-laugh. My father leaned forward. I held up my left hand. I want to show you something. The diamond ring on my finger sparkled under the sun, but not like before. Something was wrong with it. Something I had noticed. Faint, but undeniable. The cut, the shimmer, it was too perfect. Too different. The stone Damien had given me once had a flaw I'd lovingly named her scar. It was gone. This ring, I said clearly, used to carry a promise. He pawned it. A gasp rippled around the table like the wind catching fire. Seraphine went pale. Damien's expression collapsed in on itself. I wore that diamond every day. I knew its every flaw. But this one, it's not mine. It's a replacement.
He didn't tell me. He just
swapped it. Murmurs. Confused glances. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." To the man who pawned a promise, I said, voice still calm, and to the woman who performs apologies like theater. Damien shoved his chair back, rattling the quiet. This isn't the place, Diamond. No, I said. This is exactly the place. My father's voice broke in, sharp. Damien, is this true? He said nothing. His silence at last was honest. Then, to my surprise, Awfully stepped forward. Her hand touched my shoulder with a strength I didn't know she had. She deserves answers, she said. We all do. Seraphine's glass trembled in her hand. This is insane, she muttered. But her voice cracked. Her mask was slipping. I pulled the apology script from my pocket, unfolded it slowly, and placed it on the table. I found this in your office, Seraphine. She glanced down, eyes scanning her own betrayal. Damien reached for her arm. Let's go, he said, his voice tight. Seraphine turned without another word. Together, they walked away, but it was clear. He was following her, not leading. I stood there, Rosie still in my arms, watching as their silhouettes retreated into the house. The sound of their steps fading was louder than anything they'd said. The guests remained frozen. No one clapped. No one toasted. They simply sat with the truth. Rosie stirred in my arms. Her eyes, wide and curious, met mine. I pressed a kiss to her forehead. The garden, once full of pretense, now held something different. Not peace, but something honest. Acknowledgement. I arrived at Charleston International Airport just before noon. The terminal echoed with the low hum of layovers, that muted rhythm of waiting, of people caught between arrivals and departures. It wasn't crowded, just a quiet lull between flights. Stillness like this had always felt like an invitation to breathe. Today, it felt like something else entirely, the last inhale before leap. Rosie sat in her stroller, her little legs tucked beneath the soft fleece blanket I'd wrapped around her that morning. Her cheeks were rosy from the October chill, her curls wild from the wind outside. She was quiet, unusually so, her wide eyes tracking every movement with the curiosity only toddlers carry. Her small hand found mine, her fingers curling around two of mine and holding on as if anchoring us both to this moment. I looked down at her, my thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. In the midst of the shuffling of feet, the squeak of rolling luggage wheels, and the distant Pennsylvania announcements, Flight 270, now boarding at Gate 6B. Rosie and I were our own still point. I pulled out my phone. My gallery opened to the most recent images, each one tugging at a different wound. The first was from the family reunion brunch, that carefully posed photo where everyone smiled like a magazine ad. I zoomed in. Their eye was blurry on the edge, almost out of frame. Centered, of course, was Seraphine, her posture immaculate, her expression serene, her arms draped gracefully around Awfully and Damien like she was their patron saint. The caption Damien had posted online read, "Family, where love begins and never ends." I'd stared at those words last night, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Next, I swiped to a picture someone else had taken, Rosie hugging Seraphine tightly, her little face beaming. My stomach turned. It was meant to be a sweet moment, but all I could feel was the hollow space where I should have been. Then one more swipe. Rosie in my arms, her head resting against my shoulder as sunlight streamed through the window behind us. No filters. No edits. Just warmth. That photo held a truth no one else had tried to manufacture. It was the only one I saved twice. Once to my phone, once to my heart. A lump rose in my throat. I swallowed hard. The brunch came flooding back, every detail vivid. The room smelled of coffee and buttered pastries. Champagne flutes clinked in hands manicured and jeweled. One by one, my parents toasted each sibling with a small speech. To Awfully, our diplomat, always the peacemaker. To Seraphine, whose leadership guides us all. To Damien, ever the rock of this family. And then silence. There was no toast for me. No names spoken. No tribute. I'd raise my glass anyway, nodding politely. I even smiled. Years of practice made it easy to mimic indifference. But deep down, I'd cracked. I was invisible. Again. Now, standing at gate 4A, the memory faded into the noise around me. Rosie tugged my hand. I bent low, and she whispered, "You and me, Mommy." Just 4 words, but they were everything. I pressed my forehead to hers and smiled. You and me, baby. Always. The terminal buzzed with activity, travelers chattering into phones, a toddler crying, a flight attendant rushing by. But around Rosie and me, there was a stillness, as if the universe had drawn a quiet circle around us, asking the world to wait. I turned toward the boarding gate. The overhead screen glowed with our destination, Flight 326 to Seattle, on time. A fresh start. Clutched in my arm was a folder. Inside it, notarized affidavits, certified documents, Rosie's updated birth certificate with my name and no one else's. Her real name.
Mine.
No more secrets. No more shadows. I had fought tooth and nail to get those papers, to stand up against the lies written into our family's history. And now, I carried the truth, not as vengeance, but as liberation. Our group was called. I stood, lifting Rosie out of the stroller. She snuggled against my chest, her breath warm on my neck. One hand clutched my necklace, the other tangled in my hair. I handed the boarding pass to the attendant, smiled briefly, and stepped forward. No one waved goodbye. No one texted to say, "We'll miss you." No one asked if we'd landed safely. But that silence, the one that had once wounded me, now felt like an open road. We walked down the jet bridge, into a narrow tunnel of light. The hum of the engines grew louder. Rosie's eyes were heavy. Her thumb drifted toward her mouth. Once aboard, I tucked us into the window seat. The cabin lights dimmed. Rain streaked the small oval window. The tarmac glistened like polished stone. The plane rolled slowly, turning, taxiing, pausing. Then it surged forward. As we lifted into the air, Rosie drifted to sleep. I kissed her forehead, my lips lingering a little longer than usual. I looked out the window as Charleston fell away. The marshes, the bridges, the rooftops that held more ghosts than memories. I closed my eyes. This wasn't running away. This wasn't retreat. This was reclamation. Let them keep their monogrammed glasses, their legacy speeches, their toasts that conveniently forget the one daughter who refused to perform. Let them live in curated moments and filtered truths. I would choose real. Rosie stirred slightly in my arms. I rocked her gently, and she settled again. My fingers brushed the folder once more, my armor, my history corrected. The ring on my finger caught a faint glint of cabin light. Not new, not perfect, but mine again, stripped of past promises, repurposed for a new one, to protect this child, this life, this truth. Outside the window, clouds parted. Golden light broke through. I watched the horizon open wide, the sky stretching endlessly forward. The past, at last, behind me. The future, untitled, unscripted, ahead. And in my arms, the only toast I ever needed, the quiet trust of a small hand holding onto mine. Sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones who try hardest to erase us. But truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how many toasts you're left out of, or how many lies are whispered behind closed doors. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice, even when it shakes. Have you ever sat at a table where love felt conditional, measured, judged, or weaponized? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come, more stories of truth, family, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away with your head high.